What's up, everyone? I am Kyle with Limitless Power Sports Service and Repair. You may find me here on the ODES page, the AODES page, the Massimo Heisung page. You can find me on YouTube at Limitless Power Sports Service and Repair, and also here on Facebook. But I just want to talk to you guys about a few things that are really neglected when it comes to servicing your ODES right now. What I have here I'm working on is a 2022 ODES Dominator 800 X4 LT, or the 804-JC. Basically, what I'm talking about is basically the shifter. A lot of guys don't pay attention to this when they take this apart, or anybody. So basically, you treat it like you would an airbox. This thing here, I'm shooting a video on it now for my YouTube channel, and this was definitely full of water. So with that condensation in there, you need to pull that plug every now and then and drain the water out of that, just like you would at an airbox or anything like that on a quad, or most of your UTVs will have a plug to pull so you can drain any water. Another thing is greasing this up with some waterproof grease. I do the handle up top, I do the spring down below, I do the little detent there, and when you adjust the shift linkage on this, you adjust it in neutral. Okay, make sure you adjust it in neutral. You can disconnect it back here to make sure this is set in neutral, and then you can adjust your heim joints on either end as needed to make sure that this is in neutral. Now, another big part, guys will spin this way down onto the shaft, and what happens when you do that, it pushes that rod down like this, and what happens is it misses the little detents right here. So this side here rides on this, sorry if you can't see that, right here on that, and that rod basically locks it in here, here, and here. Now these will wear out if you're yanking and pulling on this thing like crazy. So make sure you guys don't have that where it holds that down. You can shift it without pushing the button. When you put it on there, I've talked about this in a few different of my videos, you want that button to be able to push in and push that detent all the way down to the bottom. So let's screw this on real quick. And if you watch that little guy there, what happens when you screw this on and you keep going, it pushes that rod down and pushes that button down. So what you want to do, you want it to come up until you can push, you'll feel a positive hit at the bottom. So spin it one more time. Now I can feel that positive hit at the bottom. You can see it's right there, that positive hit, off the positive hit. So when it hits positive bottom, I'll back it off one turn. That way I know it's all the way up. It's all the way up and engaging. Sorry about the bad view. So down here and up where it completely locked itself out. So don't run that thing all the way down. Basically, it keeps you from accidentally hitting this thing in the reverse or in a different gear or out of gear while you're running around. Another thing to help keep water out of there, this little O-ring that goes in here, that'll come out and fall. So this little guy will help keep water out of there. Just make sure you get in there, lube that up and all that. Here's that bypass for the PVC valve. When you do take that off, make sure you put a vacuum plug on the throttle body, otherwise you'll draw air. That'll cause a high idle, which is all controlled by your IAC motor right here, which is replaceable. You can find the same thing on Amazon, like 75 bucks. Clean your air filters, clean your throttle bodies. Don't go playing around with this screw unless you necessarily have to. Everything is controlled idle-wise by the IAC motor. It's basically letting air leak in and out. It reads that, all your steps, your TPS, all kinds of things play a factor in idle. Map sensor gets dirty, your IAP gets dirty, all that stuff will play a factor. But again, this is one of the most things that doesn't get serviced, overlooked service parts on one of these vehicles, and it'll definitely help with smooth actuation and all that when you do get it back together, and it'll help keep water out of there and rust out of there. So check out my YouTube channel, Limitless Power Sports Service and Repair. Some ODES I've done on diagnosing multiple things that go over belts, all kinds of things. I use ECU HUD Hacker to read codes and tell me what's wrong with stuff and help me data record what's happening. So if you got any questions, feel free to drop a comment right here. You can email me at limitlesspowersports78@gmail.com. You can also find me here on Facebook and, like I said, YouTube. If you haven't subbed to my channel, please do, guys. I'll put out a few more tips and tricks on this thing as I work on it for this next video coming up. Repair, bring you another little tip and tricks on maintenance on these ODES. Still on that 2022 800 X4 LT. Throttle bodies, all right? Let's talk about this real quick. Let me turn some light on here. Let's take a look. Now, the intake track on these gets super dirty. The Massimos do the same thing on their 500s, 700s, 800s, all that. So basically what happens when this thing gets that dirty, that map sensor gets that dirty and starts throwing it off parameters. Now, that map sensor is on another part of the intake tube. Still have to take that off. But when it gets dirty, this IEC motor starts to not work properly. So what you want to do, we're going to take this guy off here real quick, and then we're going to go ahead and take a look at how dirty that is, and never have this out and the ignition on, or otherwise you run the risk of damaging it and pushing the spindle all the way out. So make sure the ignition is off or the battery is disconnected before you take this out, or just unhook this actually, so that way you don't ever run that spindle out. So let's get this out real quick. All right, so I took the screws out, went to pull it apart, and here's the problem. This is why this thing's not idling well. You can see the little pintle or whatever you want to call this actuator arm just came right out of this thing. This thing's probably now completely ruined because that is plastic in there. So basically what happens, this thing gets clogged up with dirt and debris. If you can see it in there, how bad that is. Just look how nasty that is. You got to clean that out. You can take some brake clean, carb clean, or whatever. Don't take off your TPS sensor unless you have a tool to set this back to 0. It's supposed to set itself back to 0 when you turn the ignition off and turn it back on. But I advise don't take that off because it does have a little bit of movement and you can throw that TPS off. So make sure you clean this guy out, both ends. You would spray this off. You could put just a touch of grease on this guy here, but this should not come out like that. That is definitely caused some problems. You can see how it's kind of has that little screw motion in there. So yeah, that being bad, that is probably why this thing's not actuating, letting it actually idle. So again, make sure you clean your throttle bodies, your intake. Dude, your air filters, look at this thing. This thing will never run properly if that's all going on. It will not read the parameters right. It will not fuel right. It will not do a lot of things correctly. Again, it reads the TPS, the IEP, MAP, the MAP sensor, mass airflow sensor, intake air pressure sensor, O2 sensors, front and rear on a twin cylinder. Uses that to use the stepper motor or the idle air controller or the idle speed controller motor, whatever you want to call it, to regulate that, and dwell time on the injectors and the mass amount of fuel. All these things are pre-programmed to do that on a clean system. And it does go back and forth a little bit. They are not completely dumb. They do work, but they get too far out of parameters and they can't bring themselves back. Then you got to do an ECU reset. And I don't know why on the ODES you can't do the same thing you do on the Massimos, where you hold the throttle down for 5 seconds and wide open, let it bounce off the rev limiter, shut the key off with your foot still on the throttle, hold it there for 10 seconds, let your foot off, turn the key on, let the fuel pump cycle, fire back up. It's MT05 Delphi ECU, just like the Massimos and Hysungs, so I don't know why you can't do that. I've done it before and it seemed to work. But again, make sure you clean. Maintenance is key to longevity of these machines, so make sure you get that all cleaned up. New IEC motor coming in for this thing. Now I got to shoot that part for my YouTube video coming out here probably in the next couple weeks when I get the parts in. Again, guys, find me here, drop a comment, find me on Limitless Power Sports Service Repair right here on YouTube and Facebook. Let's check out the next tip and trick coming up soon.